There's some news of real interest that's just come out of the US last week with regards to dietary patterns. Dietary patterns, of course, a topic dear to our heart, something I talk endlessly about, and something so important to our overweight metabolic patients. The US Department of Health has just released new dietary guidelines for their whole country, and there are some aspects of them that in my view are quite remarkable. The newly released dietary guidelines for the whole country are remarkably similar to the dietary pattern we recommend for you, our bariatric clinic patients. Now, I'm not an expert in whole population dietary health. My experience is in dietary patterns for those with metabolic disease. As I've said before, there is more than one dietary pattern, but the one we recommend for you is designed for your metabolic disease, obesity and insulin resistance. The striking thing for me in these new guidelines is the areas in which it breaks from traditional government guidelines, including the New Zealand Food Guidelines, and how similar it is to what we recommend for you individually as someone with metabolic disease. The overall thrust in the guidelines, if we're looking for a theme, is whole food or real food. This from the press release, evangelising real food. This theme of whole food sits visibly through the whole guideline. Let's take a bit of a look at the 6 bullet points. So firstly, prioritise protein. They recommend protein in every meal, protein from natural sources. They no longer have any reference to limiting red meat intake, although they still recommend some caution regarding processed and preserved meats. The New Zealand guidelines do talk a lot about protein sources, but still recommend keeping red meat to less than 500 grams a week. And our guidelines don't, as far as I read, recommend protein with every meal. Secondly, the US guidelines say avoid highly processed foods, including packaged, prepared, ready-to-eat foods and fake drinks, although they don't use the word fake. No controversies scientifically here, and our own national guidelines have similar recommendations, but ours is substantially more watered down to this very aggressive and, in my view, appropriate approach to UPF. Thirdly, they take a very hard line on added sugar and artificial sweetness. Their recommendation is that no amount is recommended as part of a nutritious diet. Again, a lot more forthright than New Zealand guidelines. The 4th bullet point out of 6 is about ending the war on healthy fats. The thrust here is similar to our advice for our metabolic patients. Fat from natural sources, including saturated fat, is healthy in the context of a dietary pattern low in sugars and refined carbs. This is completely different to New Zealand guidelines, which recommend avoidance of saturated fat and preference to the processed oils such as margarine and vegetable oils. The 5th recommendation, less controversial, prioritise whole grains and avoid refined carbohydrates. I think our guidelines are similar on this, and you'll get limited argument from most people on this one. The 6th and final bullet point is perhaps the most interesting of the lot, and it's an area not addressed at all in the New Zealand guidelines. It says including diets lower in carbohydrates may be beneficial for individuals with certain chronic disease. So a statement acknowledging that for certain large portions of the population, variation from standard guidelines towards a low carbohydrate lifestyle may be beneficial. So what do I like and what don't I like? Well, it's a 90-page PDF and I haven't digested the whole document yet. You'll see what I did just there. I like the simplicity of their approach. Whilst population nutrition is not simple, there is something to be said for giving a really easy to understand direction of travel. And these guidelines certainly do that very much in a way that our guidelines don't. And I like the support for natural whole foods, including natural fats, and the hard line on ultra processing. These will be excellent guidelines for patients in my bariatric clinic, but what I can't comment on is whether they're good for a whole population or not. There are a couple of more controversial calls, including the unconditional support for saturated fat and the hard line on artificial sweetness. You may know my own view on saturated fat, which I think is the one most supported by the evidence. Saturated fats from natural sources, such as that comes with protein, is not bad for us in the context of a dietary pattern that is low in refined carbs and sugar. Excess saturated fat in a diet also rich in refined carbs is probably more risky. This essentially means an ultra-processed diet. The firm stance on artificial sweeteners I support by opinion, but if you see my video on this and the evidence base, you can see that the data is really not there either way. As a disclaimer, there have been other decisions taken by the US Secretary of Health RFK Jr. that I totally disagree with, including some of their vaccine stances. In many other ways, I'm not certain we should be rushing wholesale to adopt their approach to population health. However, there is quite a lot to like in these new nutrition guidelines, and it will be interesting to see how guideline development in other countries will be influenced.